First things first, I have to wear a hat today. It's too cold and it's lashing rain. Do you know what? The Audi R8, out not quite 20 years, but not far off it, is still a car that commands serious money and a car that we still look back at and go, that is gorgeous. And I really think the e-tron GT will be that same car. It's now almost out 5 years, so it's had a bit of a product improvement treatment, a midlife facelift, whatever you want to call it. And Audi have thrown more power at it, a little bit more styling, some very subtle differences on the headlights of the car. Nice black alloys on this S version of it. This is actually now the slowest version, despite it barely being 3 seconds to 60. The fastest version of the e-tron GT can now do 0 to 100 kilometers an hour in 2.8 seconds. It's kind of acceleration that we can't comprehend. As I'm sure you know, this car sits on the same platform and is basically a Porsche Taycan in a different dress. That's also had a massive update this year, so Audi weren't going to be left behind. These huge discs wrapped around this very impressive looking Goodyear rubber, black alloys, huge red Audi inscribed calipers. We've got charging on both sides of the vehicle. Charging is now faster. The battery chemistry is happiest actually from about 15 degrees Celsius now. It's usually around 20 to 25, so they've improved some of the chemistry in the battery. They've put a slightly funkier roof on the inside. It still slopes down into the same beautiful rear. Now we have some white Audi badges on it. Still a pretty small boot for the size of the car, despite it having a frunk. And that's essentially what you get now as a package on the outside of this beautiful e-tron GT. Let me know what you think of the styling. Is the white and black a bit too much for a car of this price, or is it just about right? Do you think Audi have got it on the money? Let me know. All versions of this, I suppose you'd call it a supercar, now get an upgraded sound system, so B&O in this car. Criticism in the past is that the back is quite small. That is still the case. You obviously can't change that with a facelift, but it's all right. Like, the floor is expanded if you lift up these seats. One of my kids says this seat's slightly higher than the driver's seat. Obviously you lose out quite a bit of space to middle area due to that hump in the floor, which is a bit of a shame that it's there. But remember, this car is a little bit more complex than your normal EV in the fact that it's 2 gears. You've got the RS version. It's got a little bit of rear wheel steering going on. So it's kind of hard to compare this with really any other EV in the market. Performance-wise, you could compare it with the Hyundai Ioniq 5N that I've recently had on the channel. Obviously, the Porsche is there. The way the suspension works, it's been improved. It's absolutely brilliant. Even with these upgraded wheels over bumps and stuff, it's very, very comfortable. But this car can actually go like this on the back rather than squat down on acceleration. All to do with making the car a more comfortable experience for passengers. Obviously, it's different when you're unleashing all those horses behind the front wheel. Many versions of the car don't actually get the full power unless you're on boost mode or you're doing launch control, but even standard with the power reduced, every version is insanely fast. And if you're strictly sticking with a 2x2, you'll be fine. Smaller kids back here will also definitely be fine. That rear window is shockingly small, and they've put some of this kind of two-tone gizmo going on, which you can use to change the opacity of the roof on sunnier days. So that's another big difference inside this facelift version. Not huge obvious changes again in the front. These seats are something we've seen before. The steering wheel is new, so it's flat at the top and flat at the bottom. It's also very large for a GT car. Very large indeed. The paddles behind control the regen, which resets every time you accelerate. So you can't click down twice and have it on level -2 of regen. As soon as you accelerate, it's gone again. And it means you can control the car with the paddles when it comes to braking, because actually the 2.2 ton weight of it kind of makes it trundle along when you've had a bit of acceleration behind you, and then you can lift off, and you'll get reminders on the dash to tell you when to lift off and save some fuel. On that note, if you hammer it, you're talking about 30 kilowatt hours per 100 kilometers, a little over 2 miles per kilowatt hour if you're watching in the UK. But if you go easy, you'll definitely see better efficiency figures. And when I'm saying hammer it, this car has been tested on autobahns with other journalists, and they were the kind of figures that they were achieving. So That's reasonably impressive. This is obviously not as tall as one of the larger Audi e-tron SUVs that just don't seem to be as efficient. You get a good mix of overview cameras, you can select your drive modes, you can dial in different levels of ADAS sensing. So from memory it's basic up to maximum. There's an individual mode where you can turn off certain parts, like if you wanted blind spot off or rear cross traffic monitoring. Not quite sure why you would want that, but nonetheless. It's also quite a tight, snug, cocooned car, and it's low. So getting in and out of it, it's not quite like getting in and out of a sports car, but it's not too far behind. So bear that in mind if you're someone who's got sore backs, sore knees, and I appreciate you might be at a later stage in life before you can actually afford one of these cars. So it's worth considering. I'm thankfully not quite there yet, but getting in and out, it's not as easy as the average higher up SUV to maneuver yourself in and out of, put it that way. But as you look around the interior, it's an interior that Tesla could only dream of making. The finish is beautiful. I would love to have seen some different improvements in this. Not that there's anything really wrong with the driving infotainment, but it's just we've seen it for the last decade. It's time to move that on, Audi. Some e-tron GT inscriptions here which light up, and you are squatted down behind the steering wheel, feeling very at one with the car, which is the whole point. You want to feel a bit special driving something like this. Anyway, on that note, let's go for a quick spin and test out the new improvements on this 2025 version of the Audi e-tron GT S. Rolls off the tongue. Audi have tweaked the air suspension in the car to lean less, so it's a flatter driving experience. But that I mean when you go into corners you don't get body roll. There's certainly reduced levels of body roll. It's also better comfort, but they say they haven't affected the driving dynamics of the car. Now when you floor it, you get this augmented sound in the car which is lovely. So it's at the same time as being firm, it's also quite forgiving over ramps and poor surfaces, and it'll stop better. The discs on the car are absolutely massive from a stopping and safety point of view. I have a head-up display here, plenty of information on that. I actually haven't even turned off the speed sign beeps on it because it only beeps once. It's quite subtle, and also I haven't found the settings, despite messing with the controls for a couple of days, to turn them off. Now there is a very simple way of turning things off, like blind spot and other safety aids, but the speed sign traffic monitoring thing just does not seem to be there. This car obviously has 800 volt architecture when it comes to charging. The fastest charging speed is now being upped as well as the forces that are used for regen braking. And as I said earlier on in the review, I've got to click this paddle that will add in 2 different levels of regen, but as soon as I accelerate, they're gone again and the car starts freewheeling. And there's no resistance whatsoever. Now, some people might like that because it reminds them of changing gears. For those of you who've driven a lot of EVs, or even some EVs, it's counterintuitive to how they normally work. So I'd need to drive for a few more days, weeks, months, maybe, Audi, if you're watching, to get my head into whether I really like it or not. But initial thoughts, I'm like, if I want regen brake, I want it on for this journey at least. I don't really want to be having to correct it every single time. The e-tron will now give you guesstimates in terms of charging as to how much charging you can do according to the state of charge. So if you're looking for a fast charger, it'll give you a bit more information about that, help you plan your fast charging a little bit better. It's quite a large battery, over 100 kilowatt hours gross. So now they say the car can actually achieve up to 600 kilometers. The only way you'd achieve that is if you really are driving it very, very slowly. Because if you use the power in this car, you can't use almost 700 brake horsepower constantly and not expect it to have an effect on fuel efficiency. It's just not going to happen. Audi say they've also decreased the weight of the battery pack by 9 kilograms, which, okay, it's not a huge amount. 50 kilograms in a car when it comes to power to weight and how it drives is actually quite an amount. That's you know, a small adult in weight. 9 kilograms, it's a step in the right direction, but it's still not really enough. In theory, you should be able to splash and dash better in this car as well, pull into a fast charger, get speeds of 320 kilowatt charging with the 800 volt technology in the car. So if you do rely on public charging, not only is it very expensive, but at least you can do it in a quick enough fashion. You should be in and out of there in about 18 minutes, which is all right. Obviously, if you can charge this at home, that is the way to do it. My own circumstances, I have a solar installation with a 10 kilowatt hour battery, and I can charge at night at about 10 cents a kilowatt hour during a window. So I'd be able to charge a portion of this car at a very, very efficient rate. And I have a PV system from a company called Going Solar, who I'm happy to recommend if you're interested in getting a PV system put onto your house. Just to be clear, they haven't paid me to say that, but I'm a believer in word of mouth, and there's so many solar companies out there. If you've one that is doing the business and you're happy with, it's worth telling people about it. A few of my neighbours have also used the same company, and they've been around a long time as well. You really can feel the suspension changes. An air suspension was always going to help it be comfortable anyway, but it definitely has been further improved. Now there's quite a lot of tyre noise and just general noise of this car. And again, maybe if it was really as silent as EVs, some EVs can be, maybe it would take away from some of the theatre, because you are able to forget, if you're just driving this car in a normal speed limit area, how much power it has. It can do it all, and then floor it, and oh my God, it's, as I said, more power than anyone is ever going to need. If I had the money, would I buy this over the Porsche? I don't know. I like the under the radar-ness, if you can call a car that looks like this under the radar, of the Audi. But then the whole ethos of owning a Porsche is something that's quite special. As I mentioned on a previous video, I have managed to get my hands on an 06 911, and I will do a video on it. It's just trying to get the time between traveling on press trips and filming so many cars, but I'll get to it. I do love the way this car looks. You'll probably be treated a little bit better on the roads by other users in an Audi versus a Porsche. That's something else to consider. I'd try both, to be honest with you, because you might prefer some little elements. It's hard to get away from the fact of you're sitting your bottom in a Porsche. But for many people, they'll prefer the Audi offering. It really comes down to that. Very, very similar cars underneath, obviously, so it's more of a personal preference. But I genuinely think if you can't afford one of these now, new, and a lot of people won't be able to, this is going to be some used by in a few years, because the performance of it, which is not going to decrease, is so good. And I think the design will age well too. Something that is really worth pointing out to you as well, over the long-term memory, that's covering 730 kilometers in this car, it's achieved an average of 22.5 kilowatt hours per 100 kilometers. That would suggest at a colder time of year, you're certainly going to get well over the 400 kilometers with all that power, but nowhere near the 600 claimed WLTP. And I remember driving this car first in 2021, before I'd driven the Taycan, and I was like, how have Audi managed to make an electric car drive like that? And I still stand over that. In fact, now it's just a little bit better. Not to sound like anybody's dad here, but really, who actually needs the level of power that you can get in this car? The top spec performance one is over 900 brake horsepower, which is just, why? Why? This car in S is now starting from a fraction under 140,000 euro. Does it feel like a 140,000 euro car? Sometimes yes, sometimes no. Performance, yes. Styling, yes. Interior space, particularly with the boot, perhaps not. But nonetheless, I think this will be a future classic if it hasn't happened soon. And the fact that it's twinned so closely with Porsche gives it another kind of level of kudos. To look at it, there's nothing really else out there like it. To go, there's nothing really else out there like it. And if you want to go electric in this kind of segment of car, you are still quite limited. So let me know what you think of it. Do you agree with the facelift changes? Do you think, well, I'd use all that extra power? Maybe not in Ireland, but let me know in the comments down below. Do appreciate you coming with me this far in the video today. Thank you very much for watching.